Dinesh D'Souza is one of the more bizarre apologists I've seen because he seems to have the weirdest misunderstandings of not only atheist arguments, but also of Christian apologist ones. Here's an example of his misunderstanding of biology.
Now, the cell can't have evolved because evolution presupposes the cell. Evolution requires a cell that already has the built-in capacity to reproduce itself.
No, it fucking doesn't. Evolution began before the cell. It began with the earliest self-replicating molecules that existed long before the first cell emerged.
So how did we get a cell? The very idea that random molecules in a warm pond through a bolt of lightning assembled a cell would be akin to saying that a bolt of lightning in a warm pond could assemble an automobile.
Yes, that might be the reason why no biologist on the face of the planet has ever fucking said that. The chemical processes that produced the first cell were not random. Natural selection acted on the earliest self-replicating molecules as much as it acts on any life form, and it does not do so randomly.
Evolution can't even account for morality. Now, this requires a little bit of explanation, so think of a couple of moral facts. And I'm not talking about heroic deeds of greatness. Think of simple things. Getting up to give your seat to an old lady in a bus. Donating blood. There's a famine in Haiti, you volunteer your time or you write a check. Now, if we are evolved primates who are programmed to survive and reproduce, why would we do these things?
We do these things because we have evolved the capacity for empathy, and the capacity for empathy, on the whole, gives us both a survival advantage and a reproductive advantage.
The advocates of evolution say, well, evolution is a form of extended selfishness. If a mother jumps into a burning car to save her 2 children, that's because she and her children have the same genes. So what seems like an altruistic and noble deed is actually merely a cunning strategy on the part of the mom to make sure her genes make it into the next generation. We're not talking about her Levi's, we're talking about her genetic inheritance. Or evolution appeals to what can be called reciprocal advantage. You scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. A businessman may be nice to a customer, not because he thinks he's a great guy, but because he wants him to come back into the store again. But these 2 common evolutionary strategies to explain morality don't explain the 3 examples I gave at all. I'm in a bus, the old lady hobbles in. She's not a relative, she isn't grandma. So genetic kinship doesn't come into it, and neither does reciprocal advantage. I don't say, well, I think I'll give her my seat because next week I want her seat.
Irrelevant. Empathy does not have to be perfectly advantageous for preserving one's genes. It only has to confer a net advantage. While there are many examples of empathy acting against our evolutionary interests, including inspiring some people to make sacrifices even for the well-being of other species, evolution will favor empathy as long as it confers an advantage more often than it confers a disadvantage. As Bill Nye says in his new book, Undeniable, the term survival of the fittest is misleading. Really, evolution is just about survival of the good enough. And D'Souza also seems to misunderstand apologetics. He considers his form of apologetics to be presuppositional, but he either doesn't know that there is already something called presuppositional apologetics, or he is grossly misinterpreting what presuppositional apologetics is. He thinks presupposition is also how science works, and here's the example he gives.
For example, scientists looking at galaxies out there have noticed that the galaxies hang together, and yet when you measure the amount of matter in them, there's not enough gravity to hold the galaxies together. They should be flying apart. And so scientists presuppose that there is some other form of matter, they call it dark matter, that must be there exercising a gravitational force. So even though we can't see the dark matter, it's detectable by no instrument, it explains what we do see.
No, scientists don't presuppose the existence of dark matter. They infer its existence after looking at the data, and they infer it from the data. This is the exact opposite of presupposition. One could call it post-supposition. D'Souza also seems to think that God is just as good an explanation for nature as any scientific explanation, and Hitchens points out a good reason to contest that view.
Don't you think there's something to be said for considering unfalsifiability when constructing a hypothesis? For example, Albert Einstein staked his reputation. He said, if I'm wrong about this, then there will not be an eclipse at a certain time of day and month and year off the west coast of Africa, and I will look a fool. But if I'm right, there will be one. And people foregathered thinking he can't be that smart, and he was. Professor J.B.S. Haldane used to be asked, well, what would shake your faith in evolution? This was when it was much more controversial than it is now, and I'm impressed to find that Dinesh believes in intelligent design, which really does require, I would think, a leap of faith, but there it is. Haldane said, well, show me rabbits' bones in the Jurassic layer, and I'll give up.
It's hard to say whether D'Souza would give up on Christianity if he were given better explanations for the complexity of the cell or the existence of moral behavior than God, because he seems profoundly ignorant of the science when it comes to those topics.